In the earlier class we have discussed how to manage the session using HTTP session and what are the different ways of creation of session. Okay, just by using no augmented get session method of request. Okay, and by sending a boolean value which is either true or false. Okay, true means create a new session if it doesn't exist, retrieve the existing session if it exists. False means retrieve the session if it exists and return null if it doesn't exist. So for the first servlet, okay, for the first servlet in the chain, okay, we make the flag as true. For the second servlet in the chain, or for the next servlets, for all the subsequent servlets, we make the flag as false. Okay, so that a new session will be created only once per user, once between a login and logout. Okay, and we have seen some maximum inactive interval. What is maximum inactive interval means? The time for which the session will be active, the time for which the session will be active if the user performed if the user doesn't perform any action in the browser. The time for which the session will be active if the user doesn't perform any action in the browser. Okay, for that web application. That is maximum inactive interval. How we get the default maximum inactive interval for HTTP session is 30 minutes. We can modify that maximum inactive interval. Okay, we can modify that maximum inactive interval by using session.setMax inactive interval, where it will take seconds. 300 seconds means it is 5 minutes. This maximum inactive interval, okay, is also called as timeout. What is the timeout, or what is the session timeout of this application? What is the session timeout of Gmail, or what is the session timeout of IRCTC? Session timeout or session maximum inactive interval are one and the same. Both are same. Some of the developers will call it as session timeout. Some of the developers will call it as maximum inactive interval. Both are same. Either session timeout or session maximum inactive interval. Both are one and the same. Either session or maximum inactive interval, either session timeout or session maximum inactive interval. Both are one and the same. Okay? Now, how we can set the maximum inactive interval means, in the application we can set the maximum inactive interval to be, okay, we can set the maximum inactive interval for the session using the method session.setMaximumInactiveInterval. Okay, and we can do the same thing in web.xml also. Even in web.xml, we can configure the maximum inactive interval. We can configure this maximum inactive interval even in web.xml. How we can configure the maximum inactive interval in web.xml means, in web app tag there will be another tag, session config. In session config there will be a tag name, session timeout. One second please. Hello. Okay. Just in session config tag, there is a child tag with session timeout, with the name session timeout, and let me close the session timeout. Okay. This is how we can configure session timeout or session maximum inactive interval in web.xml. Okay. Now, the session timeout that we have given or the session maximum inactive interval that we have given in web.xml will be in minutes. But if we set the same thing through HTTP session object, it will be in seconds. This is seconds. Okay. Through setMax inactive interval, if we set the maximum inactive interval, then it is seconds. Now 300 is seconds. In a Java application, if you set that, then it is seconds. But in web.xml, if you set the maximum inactive interval through session timeout tag, then it is minutes. Now it is 1 minute. Okay. This is how we can set the maximum inactive interval for a session in web.xml. Okay, so now we have set the maximum inactive interval in web.xml as well as we have set the maximum inactive interval or timeout in session also. Then which one will be preferred? The session timeout that we have set in web.xml or the maximum inactive interval that we have set in servlet? Which one will be preferred? Definitely, the inactive interval that we have given in the servlet application will be preferred to the session timeout that we have given in the web.xml. If both session timeout in web.xml as well as setMax inactive interval in servlet have been configured, okay, the first preference will be given to the value that is there in setMax inactive interval. Now, let's consider like if we have given 25 here, that means the session should be expired after 25 seconds if the browser is inactive. But we have set it in web.xml in such a way that it should be expired after 1 minute. Okay? Then after 30 seconds, what will happen? The session will be expired or not? Yes or no? Yes. Just because what I'm asking is the session timeout in session config is 1 minute. Inside the servlet we have set the setMax inactive interval as 25 seconds. Okay? After 30 seconds, will be the session available or the session will be expired? The session will be expired. Just because the maximum inactive interval will be preferred to the session timeout that exists in web.xml. If both are there, if session or timeout in web.xml is there, as well as maximum inactive interval inside servlet is there, okay, which one will be preferred means the web server will prefer the maximum inactive interval. Whether it is more or less, it will prefer the maximum inactive interval that exists in servlet. Okay. Then why we need to configure this session timeout at two places? Okay. Understood my question? Why we should configure this session timeout at two places? Okay, why it is required means in an application there might be hundreds of sessions. In an application there might be hundreds of sessions. The session timeout that we have set in web.xml, it is global to all the sessions. It is generic to all the sessions in the web application. Okay, but the setMax inactive interval that we have said, it is specific only to that session. Understood? setMax inactive interval is specific to that session object. But the session timeout that we have set in web.xml, it will be global to all the session objects of that web application. That's the difference. Okay, this is how we can, some interviewers will ask like, what are the different ways of making the session expire? What are the different ways of making the session expire? Then what do you tell? What are the different ways of making the session expire? Then what do you tell? How many ways are there to make the session expire? Only two? Are there only two ways of making the session expire? There are three ways. First way is using setmax and active interval. The second way is using the session timeout that we can configure in web.xml. The third way is forceful invalidation. Even forceful invalidation also will make the session expire. Executing invalidate method also will make the session expire. These are the three different ways where we can make the session expire. Each and every session object will have a unique ID. Okay? Each and every session object will have a unique ID. Just let me print the session ID. We can get the ID of the session using get ID. Okay? Each and every session object in a web application will have a specific ID that we call it as a session ID. Okay? So, let me print the session ID in login servlet as well as just let me print it in login servlet. Okay. Let me print the same in first servlet. In login servlet, we should make the get session method by using false. But in the subsequent servlets, in all the subsequent servlets, where it is? Where is first servlet? In all the subsequent servlets, we should make this flag as false. Okay. In all the subsequent servlets, we should make the flag as false. Just because session should be created only once, the session doesn't exist, it should return none. Okay. Only in the first servlet, in the starting servlet, the session should be created using the flag true. In all the subsequent servlets, the session should be created using the flag false. Even in second servlet, we do the same. With session of false. Second servlet, just we get this session ID. Understood? Yes, this is how. Let us see whether the session ID is the same in all the three servlets or not. Okay? Just we are getting the session and we are executing session ID. Session.getID method. Okay? Session.getID method will return the unique ID of the session. For each and every session, ID will be unique. Let us see how it will be. Let me try to compile the application. Servlet. Let me import that HTTP session here. HTTP servlet session. What's the problem? Let's compile. Let me try to go to the server. Server is started. Let me try to close the browser. Open another browser. Login page. Okay. Now, the login servlet. What is the session ID? Something which ends with DF87. Okay. Now, let me go to first servlet. Okay. Then, is it the same? Is it the same? Yes. Is it the same in second servlet also? Yes. Okay. Let me try to log out and try to log in again. Let me use the same username, same password. Now, is the session ID same as previous? No. Just because we have logged out. While logging out, we are invalidating the session. Since we are invalidating the session, we try to click on login again. Then a new session will be created which has a different session ID. Okay? Understood? Okay? Session ID will be unique for each and every session object. Okay? And the web server itself will create the session ID. And web server will create the session ID in such a way that it will be unique for each and every session object. No two session objects will have the same session ID. Okay? The web server will maintain that. Okay? The web server will create the session IDs in such a way that no two sessions in the web application will have the same session ID. no two session objects will have the same session ID. Each and every session object will have a unique session ID. Okay. Now let me open the browser. And there is a cookie with the name JSession ID. There is a cookie with the name JSession ID. Okay? There is a cookie with the name of the cookie is JSession ID. Okay? Is that equal to our session ID? Just try to compare our session ID with the JSession ID. It is 382054 something. Is that the same? Is the session ID and a cookie with the name JSession ID the same? The value of the cookie is the same? Yes. Okay. Now, let's consider that I am removing all the cookies. There are no cookies. Just close it. I have removed the cookies. Okay. Now, let me try to access that application. Let me try to go from next. What it is doing? It is giving a null pointer exception. Where it is giving a null pointer exception? At the 21st line. The first servlet at 21st line. Why it is giving null pointer exception at the 21st line? Session.getID is giving null pointer exception. If session.getID is null pointer exception, what is null here? Session is null. If I delete the cookies, here session is becoming null. Let me disable the cookies. Understood what I am telling? If I delete the cookie here, session is getting null. Okay? Now, let me disable the cookies. I don't know how to. Okay? Just, I am not accepting any cookies. Okay? Earlier it was like this. Just I am not accepting any cookies from websites. Okay? Click OK. And now cookies are not there. So, go to login page, refresh the page. So the control has got login servlet. In login servlet, session is available. A new session ID has been created. What is it saying? It is giving a null pointer exception at the line 21 in which servlet? First servlet. This first servlet, the line 21 is null pointer exception. Again the same. Now, when I disable cookies, is the session management done? The session management is not done when we disable the cookies. Now, can we tell that HTTP session will manage the session internally by using cookies? Yes. HTTP session, javax.servlet.http session object. The HTTP session object will manage the session by using cookies internally. So, or in order to manage the session, HTTP session object internally will use cookies. HTTP session will use cookies internally to manage the session. By default, HTTP session object will internally use cookies to manage the session. What is that cookie means? Let me enable cookies. Okay? Let me enable cookies. Let me enable cookies. Okay? I have enabled the cookies. Let me go back to the login page. refresh the page. Now let me see the server. Is that the same session ID as previous? Which is different. Okay. So now let me go to the browser. Let me go to the browser and see. Is there any cookie in my application? Yes, there are cookies. What is the name of the cookie? JSession ID. What is the value of the cookie? Is that same as the session ID? Is the session ID same as the cookie value? Yes. That means HTTP session will internally make use of cookies to manage the session. How it will do means, how the process will be done means, okay, for each and every session object, for each and every session object, okay, a cookie will be created with the name JSession ID and with the value, okay, the session ID. A cookie will be created with the name JSession ID and with the value session ID, the ID of HTTP session. So this cookie JSession ID will act as a unique identifier of the session. Okay, based on this cookie JSession ID or based on the value of the cookie JSession ID, HTTP session will recognize the specific session. How HTTP session will recognize the specific session means, what is the unique thing of a session? Its ID. How the web server can recognize a specific session means by its unique ID. How that unique ID will be transferred from browser to servlet and servlet to browser means in the form of cookie. Okay? How the JSession ID will be known to the browser and how the JSession ID will be known to the server means it will be transferred in the form of cookie. Whenever we create a session, let's consider like we are creating the session in login servlet. Whenever we create a session in login servlet and when the response is committed back to the browser from login servlet, what happens is a new session or a new cookie will be created. Now the control will come. Whenever that's why I said that. That's no problem. No problem. It's enough. So now from the browser, first what we do is we execute login on the HTML. Then it will, okay, display login servlet. Okay, we display login servlet where we have, here we have username, password and click on submit. So click on the login servlet. In the login servlet we have first name, last name. You click on submit. Okay. When we click on submit, okay. When we click on submit, the response will be coming back to the browser. Sorry. When we click on submit, the control will go to first servlet, okay, and the first servlet response or the first servlet content will be displayed in the browser. Okay, so whenever we click on submit from login servlet, what happens? First, the response will be committed back to the browser. The response will be committed back to the browser, okay, and then a session, when the response is committed back to the browser, here what we are doing, we are creating a session object in login servlet. Okay, if you create a session object in the servlet and when the response is committed back to the browser, in a servlet, if you create a session and once from that servlet the response is committed back to the browser, okay, what it will do means, what the web server will do means, web server will send a cookie with the name JSessionID in the response object. Okay, what we told, cookies will be transferred from the servlet to the browser in form of, cookies will be transferred from servlet to browser in the form of, how cookies will be transferred from servlet to browser? Is that your quality of learning? I told you clearly how cookies will be transferred from when we create a cookie. Okay, when we create a cookie in a servlet. Okay, how the cookies will be transferred from the servlet to browser. How a cookie will be transferred from servlet to browser and browser to servlet. Response? That's what? Is that your quality of learning? What Sharat? Told that you will be practicing every day. Is that your quality of learning? If that is your quality of learning, I need not to take extra classes like this. I told you clearly that whenever we create a cookie, that cookie will go to servlet or will go to browser from servlet in the form of a response header. There will be a response header with the name cookie, and the value of response header will be, okay, list of cookies. Okay, list of cookies will be separated by semicolon. Cookie 1 equal to value 1. Cookie 2 equal to value 2. Semicolon. Cookie 3 equal to value 3. Like this, there will be a response header with the name cookie. There will be a response header with the name cookie. The value will be the list of cookies. Okay, whenever we create a cookie in a servlet, that cookie will go back to the browser in form of response header. The response header name is cookie, and the value will be list of cookies. How the list of cookies will be there means, it will be there as a string. How it will be delimited means, cookie 1 equal to value 1, semicolon. Cookie 2 equal to value 2, semicolon. Cookie 3 equal to value 3. So, whenever we create a HTTP session object, at that time itself, the web server will create a new cookie object. A new cookie object will be created by the web server. Whenever we create a HTTP session object, then itself the web server will create a new cookie object, and that cookie object name will be like this. It will create a cookie object like this. New cookie of JSessionID, and the value will be the session ID. This will be done by the web server itself. The web server itself will create a cookie with the name JSessionID, and the value will be session ID, and the web server itself will add that cookie object to the response dot, okay, add cookie of the cookie, okay, and that cookie JSessionID with the value unique session ID will be transferred from the servlet to browser in the form of a cookie whose name is JSessionID, in the form of a response header, the name cookie whose value is the cookie information. So this cookie will be transferred from servlet to browser in the form of response header. The same cookie will be transferred from browser to servlet in the form of request header. Cookies will be transferred through headers. That's what we told in earlier classes. Cookies will be transferred through headers. We told clearly that there will be a request line, request header, request body. In the same way, response line, response header, response body. How cookies will be transferred from servlet to browser and browser to servlet means in the form of headers. Even in case of HTTP session also, a new cookie will be created. The name of the cookie is JSessionID. Value of the cookie will be the ID of the unique ID of the session. So, whenever a session object is created in the servlet, then itself a cookie will be created, and that cookie will be added to the response object. Okay, and that cookie name will be JSessionID, and that cookie value will be the unique ID of the session, and that cookie will be transferred to the next servlet in form of a request header. Understood? And from the browser, how the cookie will be transferred means in this form of a request header itself. Just cookie session ID equal to some session ID. Okay, like this. JSession ID equal to let's consider like the unique ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Like this, the JSession ID cookie with the value session ID will be transferred from server to browser and browser to server. Understood? Now, if cookies are disabled, can we manage the session using HTTP session object? If cookies are disabled, we cannot manage the session using HTTP session object. Then why should we use HTTP session? Why can't we use directly cookies in that case? Understood my question? HTTP session, it will be available or it will be useful only when cookies are enabled. If cookies are disabled, there is no, we cannot make use of HTTP session as per our current discussion. Then, what is the use of HTTP session then? Why can't we use cookies directly? Understood? Why can't we use the cookie object directly? Why should we go for HTTP session again? Because the first thing is, HTTP session will provide you a very flexible way of managing the session. If it is cookie, if you want to add 10 values or we want to manage 10 values in the session, what we need to do is, we need to create 10 cookie objects. But we need not to do that in case of HTTP session. Directly, just we create session and we add them as attributes to the session object, and it will be maintained by the web server itself. And only one cookie will be created here. If you want to maintain 10 values, in case of cookie object, we need to create 10 cookies. But in case of HTTP session, only one cookie will be created. Understood? Okay? And the second thing is, if you use cookies, we can manage only string values in the session. If you use cookies, we can manage only string values in the session. But if you use HTTP session, we can manage both string as well as any object in the session. We have already set a list also in the session. See the login servlet? We have set a state list, which is the array list object. We can set or we can manage any object in the session if we use HTTP session. But if we use cookies, we can manage only string values in the session. Understood? The third advantage is a cookie object can be used. Cookie object can be used to manage the session only when cookies are enabled in the browser. Understood? Cookie object can be used to manage the session only when cookies are enabled in the browser. Understood? Cookie object can be used to manage the session only when cookies are enabled in the browser. Okay? But HTTP session object can be used to manage the session either when cookies are enabled or even disabled. Understood? Yeah. What you heard is correct. We can make use of HTTP session object to manage the session either when cookies are enabled or even disabled. But if you use a cookie object, that cookie object can be used to manage the session only when cookies are enabled in the browser. But we can make use of HTTP session object to manage the session either when cookies are enabled or even disabled in the browser. Okay? We can make use of HTTP session object to manage the session either when cookies are enabled or even disabled. If cookies are enabled in the browser, for sure HTTP session will internally use cookies only. If cookies are enabled in the browser, for sure HTTP session will make use of cookies internally. If cookies are enabled, for sure HTTP session will internally make use of cookies. But at the same time, even if cookies are disabled, HTTP session object can be used to manage the session. Even if cookies are disabled, HTTP session object can be used to manage the session. But we should modify the URL. I am reiterating the same thing. If cookies are available, HTTP session object internally will make use of cookies only. If cookies are disabled, if browser cookies are disabled, then we should change the URL in such a way that okay, the session is managed. And how we can change the URL so that the session will be managed means, okay, now in login servlet the session will be available. Okay, how we can change the URL means, before this form itself we need to give this session. Let me give this session related values before the form. Okay, before the form itself we should create a session, and so first semicolon, okay, J session ID, okay, the header information. If it is question mark means after the URL, if it is question mark means we are passing request parameters. If it is semicolon means we are passing request headers. Understood? After the URL, if you are giving question mark as delimiter means the web server will consider them as request parameters. After the URL, if you are giving semicolon as delimiter means the web server will consider that as request header. JSession ID equal to, okay, what is the session ID? So we'll give the URL. Just if it is a request parameter, we give question mark here. In this place, we will give question mark if it is a request parameter. If it is a request header, then we will give semicolon. Okay? So, since JSession ID is a request header, okay, JSession ID is supposed to be passed in a request header, we will give semicolon. Okay? So, sorry, action equal to open a single quote, understood? Open a single quote, give the URL, close the single quote. That's it. Okay, and within this single quotes we are giving this URL. Okay, so the same URL should be given in the same kind of URL should be given in all the servlets. Let me give the same URL in login servlet as well as first servlet also. So now if you create a session object using request.getSession, and if the same session ID is available, then session is supposed to be managed. Understood? See, in login servlet, we are creating a session and we are adding that session ID as a request header. Okay? And the control will go to first servlet. In the first servlet, if that session is available, then it will print the session ID. If the session is not available, then it will give null pointer exception, just because this will be null. Understood? So let us see. Let me disable the cookies. Let me remove all the cookies. So cookies are removed. Let me disable the cookies. Cookies are disabled. So there is no cookie. Now let me open a new login page. Click on submit. Now it is in login servlet. In the login servlet, what is the cookie? What is the session ID? Some E3F82 something. Okay. Now from login servlet, let me go to first servlet. Let's give me another exception. Why? Let me see. There is a method in response. Please don't write. Encode, I think it is encode URI. is encode URL. So URL encode URL. We pass the URL of the target. Okay, I'll explain about this encode URL method, but let me print the URL. Okay. Just I am executing response.encode URL method by passing the target servlet URL pattern. Okay, and then getting the URL, and I am submitting the URL in login servlet. Let us see. But earlier I did not compile the application, right? That's a problem. Let me go to the previous thing. Let me compile the application. Let me start the server. Now here, cookies are not managed, cookies are disabled. Okay, let me refresh the browser. Username, password, submit. Control is there in login servlet. In login servlet, some 2514 is a session ID. Okay, now let me go to first servlet. It's still giving null pointer exception. Why is giving null pointer exception? Let me go for this. Go to login. Go to the next. So the controller has gone to first servlet. Let us see what is the URL here. Where is the URL? I did not print it, right? Let me try to. But the same session ID is available. Let me try to print the URL. Let me print the URL, compile the application, start the server. Go to login page. The URL is it's taking is lowercase. I am not sure why it's taking a lowercase. When we have seen in the browser caching, it has taken uppercase, but it is displaying here in lowercase. Even I am not sure why it is a difference. Okay, if it is taking lowercase, even in the browser also it should display in lowercase. If it is taking uppercase, even the browser also it should display uppercase. I am not sure what is the difference, but what I will do is I will stop the server. Let me revert back the application. So what we are doing is we are getting a session object. After getting a session object, we are adding a header with the name JSessionID, which is in lowercase. Okay, and the value of the header is session ID. Okay, now let me stop the server, compile the application. Restart the server. Okay, now let me log out from here. Let me try to access login page. Okay, let me give username and password. Submit. Okay, then the control is in login servlet. Now let me see the URL. Oh, I did not print the URL. Login servlet. The session ID is 0F, 0BF7, something like that. Now let me enter something. Now just this JSession ID is available as a header in the URL. Now is the session managed now? Let us see. The first servlet, what is the session ID? What is the session ID? Is it the same? Yes. What we have done is just we have added a header with the name JSessionID and the value session ID. That's it. That's it. The remaining things. Did we manually append the session ID to the session that is created in the first servlet? Did we manually append the session ID to the session that is created in the first servlet? What we have done is just we have created a session and we are executing session.get. Okay? Are we doing that manually? Are we doing that through the code? Are we appending the ID of the session to this session object that is created in the first servlet? No. Just what we are doing is the control will go from login to servlet to first servlet. Okay? While going from login servlet to first servlet to that URL, we have just added a header with the name JSessionID. Keep it in mind that we should make the delimiter as semicolon, not question mark. Question mark means it is a request parameter. Semicolon means it is the request header. So we should add a request header with the name JSessionID, where the URL is delimited by semicolon and the value should be session ID. That's it. That is enough to manage the session. But there is a chance for us to do mistakes. There is a chance for us to do mistakes. Okay? Just because we may do something, or by giving this JSession ID. Earlier we have done the same thing, right? We have done a mistake that we have given uppercase so that the session was not maintained. Such mistakes can happen. Rather than giving JSession ID as SESSION, I may give SESION. Spelling can be mistake. So this manual process, okay, will lead to mistakes or may lead to mistakes. So we should not, in general, we will not append this request header JSession ID to the URL. What we do is we make use of the methods that already exist in response object. What are the methods that will automatically append the JSession ID to the URL? Means there are two methods in the response object: encode URL and encode redirect URL. You see here, there are two methods in the response object. One is encode URL. The second one is encode redirect URL. These two methods can be used, okay, to encode the URL. What URL encoding will do means, in response object, the URL encoding will append the JSession ID. So But encode URL will give you a absolute URL, sorry, relative URL, and encode redirect URL will give you a absolute URL. Encode URL will give a relative URL, encode redirect URL will give you absolute URL. So many of the cases it is preferred to give encode a redirect URL. This URL is not in lowercase, it is in uppercase. In many of the cases it is better to give the absolute URL, so we give encode redirect URL. We will prefer encode redirect URL just because it gives the absolute URL. Understood? So we won't manually create this. We won't manually append the JSON ID to the URL. We have done that, but while doing that, we have made some mistakes. So through that mistakes, we came to know that. Okay, through that mistakes, we came to know that it's not correct. Okay, to append the URL or to append the JSON ID to the URL through code manually. We should do through some method that already exists. What is the method that already exists means encode URL and encode redirect URL. Encode URL will give you a relative path or relative URL. Encode redirect URL will give you a absolute URL. So it's preferred to go for absolute URL. So we use encode redirect URL in general. So just what we do is we execute the method response dot encode redirect URL of the URL pattern of the target cell. The URL pattern of the target cell. That's it. So that URL we are giving the action. The same URL we are giving the action. Okay. Other than appending JSON ID, okay, appending JSON ID as a request header is not the only purpose of encode URL. Okay, it's one of the tasks that encode URL will do. Appending JSON ID is not the only purpose of encode URL. What exactly URL encoding will do means, what is exactly URL encoding means? Let's consider like there are some characters that are considered to be special in URL. Semicolon, ampersand, space, okay, as well as space is not allowed in the URL. Okay, let's consider like there is a description, there is a request parameter with the name description, and the value of description is Tom and Jerry. Okay, that means if you give the URL like this, hello.loss description equal to Tom and Jerry. Now, is it a proper URL? Can we execute this in the browser address bar? Can we execute this URL in the browser address bar? Will the browser address bar access spaces in the URL? No, it will not accept. So, it will give some exception. So, to avoid these kind of things, okay, to avoid the characters that are invalid in the browser, to avoid the characters that are invalid in the browser, or to avoid the characters that are special to the browser. Now, if I give In the same way, if I give, what happens? This, in our context, in the perspective of the user, we are giving Tom and Jerry in a short form. But in the perspective of the URL, okay, the web server will consider that yes, Tom is one username, there is no value. Space Jerry is another value. So it is not a proper URL. What encode redirect or encode URL will do means, or encode URL or encode redirect URL will do means, those methods of response object will encode the URL. URL encoding means converting all the special characters, into specific codes, which will be accepted by the browser. Understood? So I think for space it is %20 something. If you observe some website, if you give spaces, it will display %20 something. Okay? And for ampersand it will be like this. For ampersand it will be like this. So for each and every special character, there will be a corresponding code which is accepted by the URL. So this, whenever we give ampersand, that will become converted to ampersand AMP semicolon. Okay? So either if it is ampersand AMP semicolon, if there is ampersand AMP semicolon in the browser, in the URL of the browser, then the browser is such a smart that ampersand AMP semicolon will be considered as ampersand by the browser. Okay? So this is what URL encoding will do. Okay? It will convert all the characters that are not accepted in the URL as well as all the characters that are special to the URL into a specific format. Let's consider, for example, the characters that are not accepted in the URL is space. So space will be converted into some format like %20 like that. The characters that are special to URL are question mark, semicolon, ampersand. These are the characters that are special to URL. So the characters that are not allowed to URL or the characters that are special to URL will be converted into corresponding codes. That's what URL encoding is. Okay? Opposite to encoding is decoding. Okay? Conversion of this ampersand AMP semicolon into ampersand or %202 space, that is what decoding is. Understood what is encoding and decoding of URL? That's how it will be. That's what the primary purpose of encode URL and encode redirect URL. Okay? Conversion of unacceptable characters or the characters that are considered to be special for URL into corresponding codes. That is the basic purpose of encode URL and encode redirect URL. Apart from that, it will even append the JSON ID as a request header. Understood? Apart from that, apart from URL encoding, even the JSON ID will be appended at the end as a request header by encode URL and encode redirect URL methods. Understood? The primary purpose of encode URL or encode redirect URL is to encode the URL. Okay? To perform URL encoding. Apart from URL encoding, okay, what they will do is they will append the JSON ID to the URL. As a request header. As a response header. They will append JSON ID to the URL. It's a request header only. They will append JSON ID to the URL as a request header. Apart from URL encoding, encode URL and encode redirect URL of response object will append the JSON ID to the URL as a request header. Understood? Now, can we call this as URL rewriting? Can we call this as URL rewriting? Are we rewriting the URL now? Yes or no? Are we rewriting the URL? Are we rewriting the URL in this case? Yes or no? Yes, we are rewriting the URL. So, when URL rewriting is significant means when cookies are disabled. When URL rewriting is significant means when cookies are disabled. Some of the interviewers will be asking like, I have Gmail application. Okay, where 10 users are simultaneously logging in. 10 users are simultaneously logging in. Okay, now at the same time, at a very same fraction of second, all the 10 users are logging in. Okay, and all the users are logging in from different browsers. How the web server will make sure that browser 1 user will get his own mails and browser 2 user will get their own mails. That means each and every user of that specific browser should get their own mails. Okay? Since they are accessing the application at the very same time, there is a chance that user 1 gets user 2 mails and user 2 gets user 3 mails displayed in their browser. But how the web server will make sure that okay, this user has come from this browser. Internally, if this is a serverless application, internally it will make use of this JSON ID. Okay? It will internally make use of JSON ID. The JSON ID information will be stored as a cookie in the browser if cookies are enabled. If cookies are not enabled, that will be sent as a request header. And how the connection between the browser and server will be maintained in the session means how the relation between browser and server will be maintained in the session means internally through JSON ID. Okay? So, how we can manage the session using HTTP session when cookies are disabled means using URL rewriting through response.encode redirect URL. When cookies are disabled, we can manage the session using HTTP session object through URL rewriting by making use of response.encode redirect URL. What a response.encode redirect URL will do means it will add a new request header with the name JSession ID and with the value session ID. But many of the web applications, 80% web applications, not 80%, even 90%. 90% of web applications will support cookies. There will be some very secured web applications which will tell that we won't support cookies, like banking sites and all. But many of the web applications will support cookies. But some secure sites will not support cookies. Got it? The next thing is, with this session management will be completed. Okay? And the next concept is, we'll go with a very small concept now, okay, which will be completed within 15 minutes. The next concept is welcome files. Okay? Welcome files. So now how we are accessing our web application? What we are doing is just we are accessing the web application through some web resource. What happens if we directly access the web application? Is giving a or not for exception. Okay? But for any web application, there should be a default page. Okay? Default page that is displayed, or we call it as a landing page. For any web application, there will be a landing page or a default page that is displayed when we access that web application. Okay? It is a standard. Okay? It is a standard that we need to have a landing page or a default page for any web application. Okay? Now, what we do is, we develop a page name develop a new page, the name index.html. Now let me develop the index. Let me take the same template in the body. Let me navigate to login.html. Welcome to HCU. Just I am developing the application like this. Welcome to HCU. This is a landing page, and when I click on the landing page, you will go to login page. Okay, if you see in the banking side, they won't display the login page directly. They'll display some welcome page. From that welcome page, if you click on some link or button, they'll navigate to login page. Now this is my index.html. Okay. Now I have developed index.html. Now let me access the same application again. Is it giving the landing page as index.html? Yes or no? See, if we access earlier, when we tried to access Hello App, the web application name directly, it was giving a for exception that telling that the resource was not found. But now it is giving index.html. Just because the default landing page or the default welcome page in any web application is index.html. Index.html is the default landing page or the default welcome page or the default welcome file for any web application. For any web application, the default welcome file is, or the default landing page is index.html. The file name is index.html. Index.html is the default landing page or default welcome file, whatever you want. The landing page we even call it as a welcome file or welcome page. Welcome file or welcome page or landing page, all are one and the same. The default is index.html. The order will be like this. The default is, first it will check for index.html. With a Tomcat server, it will check for index.jsp. If both index.html and index.jsp are there, then it will prefer index.html. Okay? First it will check for index.html. Then index.html is not there, then it will prefer index.jsp. Okay? If index.html and index.jsp both are not there, then the web server will prefer, okay, the landing page configurations or the welcome file configurations in web.xml. Okay? If both index.html and index.jsp are not there, then the web server will prefer the welcome file configuration in web.xml. Where we can configure landing page means in web.xml. Where we can configure this welcome file or landing page means we can configure that in web.xml. Now, what I'll do is I'll make a servlet as a landing page. Okay? Now I have made HTML as a landing page. Later on I'll make servlet as a landing page. Let me make a servlet as a landing page. Okay? Now let me create a servlet. Like landing servlet. Let me save this. Okay. Welcome to HCU. Click here to log in. And the landing page method should override doGet method. Landing page or welcome pages cannot have doPost methods. Or whether we have doPost method or not, doGet should be overridden. Okay? Landing pages should have doGet method overridden. If a servlet is a landing page, or if you want to make use of servlet as a landing page, then we should override doGet method. Whether doPost method exists or not, it is irrespective, we should override doGet method. Just because from the browser address bar, if we give any URL, it will be of get only. Understand? From the browser address bar, if we give any URL, then the web server will consider it as a get request only. Either from the browser address bar, if we give URL of a servlet, or if it is a hyperlink, or if it is a form is submitted using get, it will be considered, the web server will consider them as get only. Okay? Let's consider like we have login servlet. What is the method that is overridden in login servlet? doPost. So if I give directly like hello slash 123.login. What it tells? It is not giving a 404 exception. It is recognizing the URL, but since we have directly accessed from the browser address bar, it is taking as a get. But in that servlet, what happened? It's overriding doPost. So if you access any URL of a servlet from the browser address bar, okay, it is expected to be doGet. It's expected to override doGet method. Understood? Either we access the URL from browser address bar or through hyperlink or through form submission using method get, doGet should be overridden. Okay? So we should override doGet method in landing server. Okay? Understood? The reason why we should override doGet method? Just because from the browser address bar, if we submit any request, it will be a get request. Now, let me copy this. Let me configure the servlet. Where is web.xml? Let me configure the servlet. Let me configure event mapping. We give the same servlet name. We will start our class. Okay. So now, how to configure a landing page or a welcome file? Web.xml is we give a tag. Welcome file list. Sell that. Welcome file. Just I'll give any URL pattern. Hello that. Please don't write this. We'll write this once executed. Once executed successfully. You may have done some minor mistakes, but most probably, as my best knowledge, it is like this. I did not try this for a very long time. I did not remember it exactly. But as per my best knowledge, it is like this. We have a welcome file list tag where there is a welcome file tag where we give the URL. Okay? Let me stop the server. What is this doing? Is it because of power? Sorry. We have given, here is the select mapping tag. Select, that's fine. Now let me stop the server. Compile the application. Restart the server. Server is started. So let me try to access. Let me close the browser. Open the browser again. Let me try to access the landing page. Where is our server? started. Let me try to access the application. 1.4. Hello app. But index.html is there. Let me not give this welcome file list. Start the server. Start the server. Why is not taking now? Next tag is there. But why? Huh? Web.xml is not saved. Sorry. Web.xml is not saved. Let's pay us. If I give index.html, it is working fine. But if I configure the servlet, what happens? Let me use slash. I will use to differentiate that. Let me close the browser, open another browser. Still going to index.html. Now let me close this index.html. Even I am making some RJ because even I am not aware of these things. Just I'll cut this index.html so that index.html doesn't exist. Okay. Let us see if there is no index.html, what happens. Copy this URL, close the browser, open another browser. So it is giving some problem. Now let me see the web.xml. Welcome file list exists, but if I don't give hello.xml, restart the server. Need to make some RNG, but there is something with this URL itself. Okay, otherwise the welcome page will work fine, except there should be some tweak in this URL. Let me do the last thing. There is something with this URL, but this is how we can configure a default landing page. By default, landing page is index.html. There is no index.html. Index.jsp will be considered as default landing page. If both index.html and index.jsp are there, then index.html will be considered as landing page. If index.html doesn't exist and index.jsp exists, then index.jsp will be the default landing page. Other than index.html and index.jsp, if you want to configure any other web resource as landing page, let's consider like hcu.html. Let's consider there is a web resource hcu.html. If you want to configure that as a web resource, if you want to configure that as a landing page, okay, then we need to configure that in welcome file list. Okay. Other than index.html and index.jsp, whatever the web resource if you want to configure as landing page, we should configure that in welcome file list. So we can configure any number of welcome files. We can configure any number of welcome files. So first it will search 123.test. If you configure 3 URLs like this, for example, so first it will search test as welcome page, something that hello.test as 123.test as welcome page. If not exists, then it will search 123.hello as welcome page. If not exists, then it will search 123.learn as welcome page, like this. Okay. So we can keep or we can give any number of welcome files in the welcome file list, but the first that exists will be the landing page. The first existing file will be the landing page. The first valid file will be the landing page, or the first valid URL will become the landing page. In a welcome file list, we can configure any number of URLs, but the first valid URL will become the landing page. But you yourself do some R&D, like try to search welcome file list in web.xml, in Google, so you can find some examples. But as per my knowledge, best knowledge, this is how we can configure welcome files. But there is some tweak required in the pattern of this URL. Just search for that pattern. Okay, how the pattern will be. Okay, except that concept wise, welcome file list is this. Okay, welcome files are required to configure some landing pages. Okay, by default, index.jsp and index.html will be considered to be landing pages. If both index.jsp and index.html are there, then index.html will be preferred. Other than index.html and index.jsp, if you want to make any other web resource, either HTML page or JSP page or a servlet as a landing page, we need to configure that in welcome file list. In welcome file list, we may configure any number of welcome files, but the first valid welcome file will be the landing page. Understood? That's how it will be. And the next thing is filters, servlet filters. That we'll discuss in the next class. Tomorrow we'll assemble at 6:30 to 8:30. Okay? It's fine, right? 6:30 to 8:30. Okay? We shall leave for the day. Tomorrow morning 6:30 to 8:30. But